नमस्ते सर, आपका स्वागत है वमन मैटर्स यूट्यूब चैनल पे। और मैं पूरी तरह प्रयास करूंगा कि आपके वक्त को न्याय दूं और लोगों के भी वक्त को। एंड आई विल मेक श्योर दैट द इंटरव्यू इज awesome and exciting for all the viewers. Sir, starting from, I am excited to know that you are academician, scholar, sportsman, and an author. What do you enjoy the most about yourself?
Oh, well, the best thing is that with many interests, I never get bored because if I'm tired of writing, then I can go for a run. If I'm not in the mood for running, then I can study. So there are a lot of options. If you keep your interests wide, then you never get bored in life.
From means you are a person who believes in diversity, and that is a thing which keeps you going on.
Yes,
Different.
you have to have diversity. You see, since the way that the labor market has been created in a state like India, everybody is pushed down one channel. You must only do one thing. Your job is to do this and nothing else. And this creates a one-dimensional life. But if you look at history and you look at all of the different things that people do, then you see that people are capable of accomplishing success in many different fields. And it's the obligation for having a complete life that you don't just try to go down one channel. Even if you become expert at one channel, which is very good, you should have any other interests. So diversity is the key to happiness.
Uh, did this seed of diversity in your mind and in your heart, who bestowed that seed upon you? Were your parents or friends or college, or who were the actual people that motivated you to do this?
Well, if you look at one of my books, I don't know if you've seen it. It's called The Philosophy of Autobiography. Um, that is a book that includes many of the people who had this impact on me. So you can look there. There are some writers, there are some philosophers, there are some poets. You see that. Um, I mean, you can think about it even for yourself. When you look at the people that you admire, generally there are people who accomplished not just one thing, but either they accomplished over and over again, or they accomplished in many different ways. So I have inspirations captured in that book, The Philosophy of Autobiography. But this is the inspiration from people that I don't know personally. In my personal life, what I found was that I admired so many different people. So my father was also a professor, but he had very wide interests. He was a psychoanalyst, but I would see him reading in many different areas, literature, uh, art, poetry, and so on. And so I learned from early that even academicians who are told to specialize in one area, actually that's not necessary. So on the one hand, you think of who you admire and you find generally that they've accomplished many things or many different kinds of things, not just one thing. And secondly, what I've seen, even the people who are expected socially or professionally to just do one thing, what I've seen is the ones who are very happy and very successful, they're actually engaged in many, many things. Um, what they all have in common, if I know them or I don't know them, what they all have in common is that they don't follow the social expectations. If you follow social expectations, then you end up being what society tells you to be. And when we have societies that are so inegalitarian, that are concerned not with everybody flourishing to the maximum, but instead everybody minding their own business and staying quiet. If you listen to society, then what will you ever achieve? You'll mind your own business, you'll stay quiet, you'll be stuck in your one profession, or sometimes you're lucky even to have a profession since we have such high unemployment in India. So you have to defy your expectations and do the things that society doesn't really expect you or um, uh, favor that you do. And you can see this in a lot of different kinds of poetry or cinema, film, song. All of these people we like, they generally do many different kinds of things. So just watching your own heroes and heroines and so on, I think can inspire you to appreciate diversity.
In philosophy, philosophy is a very broad subject, very broad subject. Which is the best philosophy part you love from India and you love from Western world, or in which is the love that you like in between, which philosophy
Yeah,
is
I
the
think
best?
from uh, from outside of India, I'm always drawn to ancient Greek philosophy, especially the philosophy of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. So I've recently written a book on Plato's philosophy, which I think is uh, um, expresses all of the things that I love about this. And from India, it's not ancient philosophy that I like very much because it tends to be rather orthodox and, as we call it, Brahminical. It suggests a kind of specific worldview. So instead, I like modern philosophical thinkers. A very vibrant period in modern India was around the turn of the century, so 1900s, uh, 1920s, 1930s, when people like um, K.C. Bhattacharya started to write. A lot of the modern Indians who were educated both within Indian traditions, but also got educations in London or New York. So Baba Sahib Ambedkar's writings in philosophy, philosophy of Hinduism, on Buddhism, and so on. This is the part from India that I think is the most interesting. So the early 20th century in India, not the ancient, but in the European world, the ancient philosophy of Socrates and Aristotle, more than the modern. I find the modern in the European world not so interesting.
Many people in India, and my experience in Mumbai itself is that about whenever people say Jai Bhim, the Jai Bhim word itself gives a person goosebumps on body. What, this and few people don't like this word, two words, Jai Bhim. They feel that this word itself belongs to a specific people only, not to a whole nation. What myths you have encountered on the word itself, Jai Bhim, to be very particular and exact. And from this platform, how you want to clear those myths that on this, especially when we greet each other, Jai Bhim. What
Hmm.
wisdom or knowledge or neutral view you have on this?
Well, this is I think this is a somewhat complicated subject matter because it almost always depends on from which side you're approaching it. So you had mentioned, is there a neutral way of thinking about it? I don't actually think there's a neutral way of thinking about it, because this is an expression of pride and an expression of a demand. It's not a it's not a neutral expression. It's an expression stating your presence and your expectations. So when one says JB, one is articulating a counter narrative to a dominant narrative, which is that the dominant narrative is that neutrality is the realm of the Savarna Hindu. This is supposed to be neutrality. And anyone who is outside of the Savarna Hindu uh, identity is a marginal person. When you say JB, you're contradicting that. You're erasing that concept, because you're suggesting that what it means to greet, to interact, is an expectation of a field of equality, a field of dignity, a field of mutual respect and expectation, so that cooperation, mutual sympathy, and this is based not on the status quo, but based on the life of a person who represented that you must always struggle. You must always struggle for rights. You must always struggle for liberty. You must always struggle for equality and self-respect. So I think it's not a neutral phrase. It is a inspirational phrase. And being an inspirational phrase, it is natural that some people should feel excluded by this phrase. Now, the thing is that whether you feel included or excluded is your choice, because anyone can choose to struggle for equality. Anyone can choose to join the emancipatory struggle of the marginal communities. It's not that, you see, I personally, I'm not from Dalit background. My family is Dalit family, but my own personal identity is not from Dalit background. But I have chosen to belong to this community of struggle, community of engagement, community of pursuit of enlightenment and equality and dignity for all people. So for me, this expression is a thrilling expression, because it suggests that we are mutually moving forward in dignity and expectation, and not satisfaction with the status quo. So I can understand why some people would say it is not, how did you phrase it? It is not a national expression. Okay, fine, but you can make it one. It's your choice to make it a national expression. If you want to cooperate with the national movement of self-respect, dignity, equality, then you make it your expression. If you say, no, this doesn't include me, that's your choice, because no one has to be born into the move for equality. The idea of being born in is a very basis of inequality, that you should be born into a disadvantaged community or an advantaged one. And this is the mentality that we move beyond. We move beyond this mentality by cooperating in a community that greets one another with JB.
Moving on, the next question is about literature. Why your central focus is on Ambedkar in literature, especially about your new book? Uh, I want to know about your uh, views on that.
So I have been, my new book, Ambedkar's Preamble, is actually the 20th book that I've published. So I'm just giving you one background. If you want, I can show you a few of them I have on my bookshelf. I'm saying this because somewhere around the maybe 10th or 11th book that I published was on the Buddha and his Dhamma, a critical edition of the Buddha and his Dhamma. So I'm saying this because it was not always my main area of research and writing. So what happened was I met my wife when I was professor at the University of Berlin in Germany. And at that time, I must have been 30 years old. I had grown up primarily in New York City, in the United States, and I didn't know who Dr. Ambedkar was because I grew up as many people, second generation in the United States, within that orthodox understanding that India is primarily a Hindu nation. This is the propaganda that most of the um, NRIs are raised with. So, of course, everyone knows around the planet who is Gandhi. I was quite familiar with Gandhi and Indian philosophy and all of these things. I had studied Sanskrit when I was young. But when I was introduced to Dr. Ambedkar, I thought, okay, this is interesting. Let me read. And then each page that I read, I thought, this man is brilliant. How come I've studied law, I've studied philosophy, studied politics, I know the classic literature. How can my education be so incomplete that I do not know the writings of this person? So slowly, I read each book, one after the other, after the other, after the other, and I realized that this is the greatest resource of intellectual information, passion, uh, um, aspirations, driving wishes that you can find either in sociology or in political science or in law or in philosophy. Ambedkar is precisely one of these people who refused to remain satisfied knowing only one thing. He was one of India's greatest historians, and yet he's not taught in any history department. Certainly one of India's premier legal minds. He's known as the author, the architect of the Constitution, but nothing more. We don't understand the depth of his legal thinking. And in philosophy, he's not known at all. In political science, he's known only for Annihilation of Caste, which is, of course, a masterpiece. But if you look at all of his writings, someone like me, I told you I've written 20 books. The first 10 were not about Ambedkar. But after I discovered the, uh, the amazing wealth of scholarship of this person, then the last 10 books have all been related to Dr. Ambedkar somehow. And I have 5 more that I'm planning, all on Dr. Ambedkar. One can write a complete library on this person's work because his mind was broader than uh, most philosophers' minds, or most political scientists' minds, or most lawyers' minds, or most historians' minds, or then sociologists' minds, or economists' minds. I don't know much about economy. That's why I don't write about Dr. Ambedkar and economy. But these other subjects, law, history, sociology, philosophy, politics, I'm educated in all of these disciplines. So one by one, I work on Dr. Ambedkar's thoughts on all of these fields. And one lifetime is not enough to write as much as is available there. So being myself someone who's not satisfied with doing one thing, I see a role model in this person who lived a life always with one pursuit in mind, the pursuit of justice, but expressed in every different possibility, every different way that it could be done. From the personal point of view, from the religious point of view, from the social point of view, from the family point of view, from the political point of view. Every way that a person can live a life, he tried to live in the pursuit of justice. So there's so much material there to be written about this person. It's like discovering a great, uh, I don't know, new island with all kinds of new species that no one has ever discovered. There's so much there to find. And as someone who had not been grown up, my wife grew up with Dr. Ambedkar in the house, right? With the books, the stories, things like that. So for her, she's always been somewhat aware of these things. But for me, someone who had to discover later in life, it's always a process of catching up, seeing how can this person have said this at such an early time, at such a young age. How can he write something so exceptional? How much work he's done, how many speeches there are, how many books he tried to write, all of this thing. There's no end for someone like me who's catching up later in life to I mean, I can write 10 more books on Dr. Ambedkar without any difficulty because there's so much there in his work.
One wrong message in India is always spread about Ambedkar and in the whole world, that the constitution which Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar wrote is only a copy paste thing, that anyone can do this.
Yeah.
वो तो बस copy paste किया, उससे उतना बड़ा क्या है? How can we counter this wrong narrative about such a honorable personality?
Yes. Well, that this is a claim that is given in ignorance, but people are not interested in correcting their ignorance unless first their attitude is right. So there are many things. I'm an open-minded person, but I'm sure there are many things that I live in ignorance about that I'm not even interested in correcting my ignorance. So it's not actually that knowledge comes first, that knowledge changes points of view. It's actually attitude that tends to come first. Once you have an attitude to open yourself to learning different things, then information can change your mind. So this is a small problem, actually a large problem we're facing today in the polarization of India. We are closing our attitude. So somebody like me, I only want to listen to the viewpoints of Ambedkarites and progressive people. Someone else will only want to listen to the viewpoints of right-wing people. So either of these groups, it doesn't matter the fact that comes. Either way, I will, refuse to listen. So the idea of copy-paste is so easily disproved. It's a completely false claim that has no legitimacy. But the real issue is not saying, look, do you see that? You see people refer to the 1935 Government of India Act as the basis of the 1950 Constitution. Do you see that there's a substantial difference in these? In 1935, there were no rights. And we know today the most important part of our Constitution is, of course, our fundamental rights. That was not there in 1935. So we can see that without Dr. Ambedkar, these rights would not have been so organic, so essential to our Constitution. I would not want to live in a state that didn't have the priority of fundamental rights. Then you can go and live in a dictatorship in Iran or in North Korea or something like that. The difference, if you want to say that it's just a copy paste, that means that you don't care the difference between North Korea and India, because these things were not copy pasted. Fundamental rights were not there in any prior constitutional document. So the facts are easy to show, but I don't think people spread this false information because they don't know the facts. They spread it because there's something in their hearts that they need to be they need to try to put down the achievements of Ambedkar, or they need to try to claim that the story of the right wing, of Savarkar, of Arun Shourie, that these stories is the correct story. All of that is easily disproved, but this is not a question of evidence or knowledge. This is a question of attitude and heart.
One more thing, there is one more thing that I feel that you can give your wisdom on that, which always haunts me a lot about judiciary and military, is that there is no reservation as such there, because people think that if reservation people will go, then that will bring down the country on knees, and country will not progress in a proper way, and there will be always a fight there, and it will make our country it will break down our unity of the country if there is also a reservation. So what are your insights on that, that which can help this clear this myth and this wrong message, or what is truth behind this? Is such narrative correct by people who feel that this thing?
Uh, well, let's. There are at least three parts to this discussion. Okay, it's a very complicated discussion. Let's start from the very beginning. The claim that if you have reservation, for example, reservation is not there in institutions of national importance also. Um, so certain medical institutions, technological institutions. The claim, the argument is that if you have reservation in these areas of national importance, then we might bring down the quality of the institution. This is an empirical claim. Now, when you make an empirical claim, it means that you have evidence for what you're saying. There is no evidence for this. On the contrary, the evidence, the only empirical evidence that we have in India and that is available throughout the world where affirmative action is practiced, like the United States and Canada and the UK and so on, the only empirical evidence that is available is that when you diversify the pool of candidates, the cohorts, the batch, when you diversify them in terms of class and gender and caste and sexuality and other and religion and so on, you get a more high achieving cohort, a more high achieving batch. That's in terms of empirical evidence. There is no empirical evidence anywhere in the world to support the conclusion that if you have affirmative action, I say affirmative action because this is where the empirical evidence is. In India, we don't use empirical evidence. We just scream false facts, that reservation will do this. You need proof to make that claim, but we don't have proof because we don't do proper studies. We don't do the proper study because our heart is not in the right place. We don't want reservation to work. So if you don't want reservation to work, you will not do a proper study of if it's working or not working. So we can't really look at India because there's no empirical information. If you look at the places that have implemented affirmative action, positive discrimination, because they realize that it is the only path to justice in a democracy, the empirical evidence shows, on the contrary, that affirmative action enhances the quality of the output. So that's the empirical issue. We claim that we cannot have reservation in the faculties of IITs. So we've done this now throughout the entire 20th century. Which IITs are top institutions in the world? None. IITs in India say that to keep them excelling, we have to not have implement reservation for the faculty. But none of our IITs, though they get 25% of the entire higher education budget, they get 25% of the entire higher education budget of India. They do not implement reservation because they are institutions of national importance, and yet name a single IIT that anyone would prefer to go to rather than Stanford or MIT or Harvard. Anyone would choose IIT? Nobody. Nobody in the entire world. So it's a fiction. It's a lie. It's a lie that we say that we're maintaining the quality. What we're actually doing is that we're maintaining a kind of upper caste reservation in these institutions. We're using public money to reserve most of academia, all of judiciary, um, for the upper castes. And so now I move to the second point. The first point is empirically there's no evidence. Secondly, what we don't understand is really happening, or what we wish not to admit, is that if we have reservation in public institutions, when it comes time for an interview to take place, if the person is from a reserved category and the position is in the general category, then the selection committee will say, no, we will not take the reserved person in the reserved category. So if this is how it happens, and you don't take someone from reserved categories into the general category, what it actually means is that there is at least 50% reservation for upper castes, minimum of 50% reservation for upper castes, because you won't take reserved people into the general category. The general category, the courts have ruled, cannot be less than 51%. So what's actually happening is that we have a system in place of reservation for the upper castes to ensure that the upper castes, even though they might be smaller in percentage, 20%, will have mandatory 50% reservation. And yet what we continue to talk about is how the scheduled castes, STs, OBCs have so much reservation as 49%, even though they're 80% of the population. So we're trying to squeeze 80% of the population into less than 50% of the posts, which are publicly funded. Everyone is paying for it, including the STs, SCs, OBCs. They're squeezed into a small pool, while the small cream of society, which is the upper caste who have inherited capital, social capital. People from these families inherit social resources as well as property. They, even though they're this many, they're guaranteed a minimum of 50% reservation. So the truth of this is the other way around. There is a policy of reservation which is of enormous advantage to the upper castes. And instead of admitting that it is of their advantage, they continue to blame, accuse, are violent towards the people who are fighting only for a small share that deserve much larger share. They're trying to get a small share, and they are being bullied and mistreated and so on. And now the third point. Whose fault is this perception, not inability of the common man, the common middle class man in India to not understand the virtues and the benefits and the requirements of reservation? It's the government's fault. So the government could very, very easily, 70 years back and consistently, 70 years, decade after decade, they could have clearly stated to all of the Indian population, reservation is in the interest of all Indians. Now, someone from upper caste community, all these Rajputs in UP lighting themselves on fire, or doing all of these people, they need to understand very basic economics. And it goes like this. If you have a government that has a program to spend a certain amount of money in a particular targeted area, then everyone from the moment that this money is earmarked until it is spent, everyone along the way benefits. Now, who is everybody along the way? All of the bureaucrats. What is the percentage of reserved posts in bureaucracy? It's very small. That means that 80% of entire bureaucracy is benefiting from the reservation system. Now, who owns the institutions? Who is on the board of all of the institutions that is run by this public money? How many people from the Dalit Bahujan background or Muslims, or very small? The whole economy of the country, the public sector, is designed to benefit the public at large, and it is running a system of reservation, which is a small part of the public sector, which is boosting the entire economy, and it is boosting the entire public sector and public uh, uh, administration, education, healthcare. All of these things are enhanced financially and demographically, the kinds of people that come in by reservation. So the third part is the government has failed to clearly tell the Indian population that reservation is not to benefit a small group of people in line with identity politics. Reservation is a large-scale social justice operation from which the country as a whole benefits. And there are many analogies to show this. The Indian government, in fact, does not allow foreign NGOs to operate freely in India anymore. And the reason is, let's say a United States NGO is operating in India, 100% of the money comes from the United States to be spent in, let's say, UP somewhere. Who does the institution hire? They hire white Americans and Europeans, not Indians necessarily, in the executive positions. And then they spend this money. The majority of the money is spent on overhead, so costs that are internal to the organization. And in the very end, only about 30% of the money goes to the target people, common people in UP. But when the United States government declares to the world that they have spent $1 million on the citizens of UP, the fact is they've spent only 30% of that money on the citizens. 70% has gone back to its own people and its own infrastructure and so on. So consequently, reservation is okay. So reservation works very similarly. We believe that we are diverting all of this money to be given, handed over to SCs or STs or OBCs. But in fact, the amount of money that goes into the education or whatever institution it is, that goes to the recipient of the reserve position, is nothing compared to the amount of money that goes back into the system as a whole. And the status quo is that this system is primarily Brahmin, and so most of the money from reservation doesn't go to SCs. In fact, it goes disproportionately high to Brahmins. And this is an empirical fact. I'm not saying a political statement. This is an empirical fact of administration. So the government has failed to explain to the Indian community as a whole that reservation is not taking money from the upper caste and giving it to the SCs or STs or OBCs. The fact is, this is public funding that, in order to help a targeted community, is in fact improving the economy as a whole, and the upper castes are great beneficiaries of this process. Now, why nobody has said that in 60 years of government and allowed instead clashes, violence, riots, rapes, murders, lynching? This is a huge defect of our public policy, not to explain to people that reservation benefits everybody.
I want even you to speak or expose this wrong narrative in the whole world, that it says that in India 80 to 90% are Hindu only. But in reality, uh, the upper caste people don't accept or give them rights like human beings. So, how much reality or truth is there behind this narrative, which they feel is true that 80% are Hindus only?
Yes. Well, it depends how these categories are being used. So there was in the very early census that the British introduced in this era, in the 1870s, Hindus did not want Dalits to be included as Hindu. They were saying, no, no, they belong to another category. But later, as the Muslim League started agitating, and the upper caste Hindus saw their numbers decreasing, that it was that time that they said, no, Dalits are part of the Hindu community. So, and then of course Gandhi's efforts to ensure that all of the SCs stay within the Hindu category. So this is not known so much to our own history because our history books are written by upper caste people to produce that narrative that India is 80, 90% Hindu or whatever. This is a political uh, propaganda. If you get into the reality of it, historically, we have always included or excluded based on what we're trying to achieve. Socially, we have always excluded. So how can you call someone a Hindu who's not allowed into a temple? If temple entry is part of Hinduism, then everyone who is excluded cannot be a Hindu by definition. And then, of course, the Buddhist communities and the converts out of Hinduism, because of the law for so many years, they had to, for the purpose of reservation, they had to claim on their caste certificate that they were Hindu. Otherwise, they were not granted a reservation. So each of these have conspired. Each of these different things has created a conspiracy where we don't really have the accurate understanding of who is a Hindu and who is not a Hindu. It's very interesting in this regard. Two books, Kanchai Laya's works, Why I Am Not a Hindu. This is a little older book, but it clearly explains many of these difficulties of why he cannot regard himself as a Hindu. In a very recent book, my wife was looking at it today in the bookshop, I Could Not Be Hindu, a new book by a Dalit man who I think tried to join the RSS. I've forgotten his name, but I think he's Maharashtrian, who showed while he was under the influence of right-wing Hindutva ideology, he was attempting to conform, to assimilate, to deny his identity in order to be part of the Hindu community. And he found that even while trying to do this, he was always pushed out, pushed out, pushed out. So he came back to his sanity. He found he realized that there's no place for Dalits in RSS or in Hindutva ideology. And he's written a very nice book, Why I Could Not Be Hindu. So there's a great deal of literature to show the politics and the propaganda behind this kind of majoritarianism.
My next question is on JNU incident. How will you define nationalism? What can be done or should be done to propagate the idea of nationalism in young minds so that they learn to look it with a rational lens? JNU incidents which took place that lefts are anti-nationals and rights are only who love the country, the only option.
Yes.
What is
Yes.
your rationality, rational analysis on these things?
Yes. Dr. Ambedkar had made a very insightful remark back in 1947. He said that unfortunately for India, there is a new theory of nationalism in India, and it argues that those who belong to the majority are national, and nationalism is when the majority has all political power. And what that suggests is that those who belong to different kinds of minorities, whether it is non-Hindu, non-majoritarian in some way, if any of these groups attempts to participate in power, in governance, in power sharing, then they're called communal, anti-national. And this is the same logic that is functioning right now. It is assuming that the majority has the natural right to have all political power. Now, if that were true, then we would have no need for a judiciary, because the function of the judiciary, going back to constitutional law and why we form a state in the first place, the function of the judiciary is to protect a minority from a tyrannical majority, because majorities always have a tendency to be tyrannical. If you belong to the big group, why should you listen to the small group? So we have to have something in place to make sure that the majority respects the rights and the privileges of the smaller communities. This has broken down today. Now, the only way to educate people into understanding why we have a need for a system of rights and power sharing is to make them imagine what it's like not to be part of the majority community. So you have to imagine, what if you were not male, Hindi speaking, upper caste Hindu? What if you were female? What if you were Dalit? What if you were OBC? What if you were non-Hindu, if you were Muslim? What if you were South non-Hindi speaking? What is the fair way to organize politics, considering that it's only by chance that you belong to this majoritarian group? There are two things that this majority seems not to understand. One is, when they go out of India, they no longer belong to a majority. Now, if you go to Europe, they're seen as a minority belong to. When they are in Europe, are they not advocating equal rights for people of different skin color? Are they not advocating that equal rights for Hindus vis-a-vis Christians in Europe or the United States? So when these Indians go out of India and they're no longer a majority community, they're fighting for equality of religion. They're fighting for equality of racial equality. Inside of India, the only thing that people are fighting for, like JNU, is equal rights of religion, so secularism, and for non-racial discrimination, caste. All we want is secularism and annihilation of caste. Same thing that the majority Indian wants when he goes outside of India. So why can he not see that this is what we want inside of India? But I think, again, the laws are very clear. This is not so much about ignorance and knowledge. This is about attitude and.
My question is Islamic terrorism and Hindu terrorism. What role citizens, civil society, organization can play to stop people being brainwashed into turning radicals?
Yes. There have been many studies on radicalization, what makes a person a terrorist. Let's be very clear, first of all. There is very, very little terrorism in India, even though we have seen horrible acts of terrorism. When you compare the violence, the deaths from terrorism to things like um, diabetes or road accidents, traffic accidents, or malnutrition. The comparison is impossible to make. So the very idea that terrorism takes so much of our mental space is itself partly uh, the fault of the government and the media. And as long as we have a government who finds it very useful to talk about terrorism, as opposed to that we have no public education, that we have manual scavengers dying in the sewers every day, that we have uh, um, such impossibility for educating girl children because they're dropping out of schools and getting married. As long as these profound social problems remain so high, government finds it very useful to talk about terrorism because for many, many reasons. One of them is that it allows using the state law to surveil, to watch uh, ordinary citizens and to repress dissent. So the talk of terrorism by the government, which gets repeated over and over by the media, is largely, not entirely, but largely a propaganda effort to keep people from focusing on the real profound problems. Now, that being said, terrorism is, of course, radicalization into Islamic terrorism or Hindu terrorism or any kind of terror organization. That radicalization is a problem that will never be solved if we don't want to look at the real social factors that are involved, like alienation, um, uh, certain forms of poverty, discrimination, and humiliation, even faced by right-wing people. Um, it may not be an actual discrimination, but it is a perceived discrimination. For example, you find, if you follow right-wing people on Twitter, you'll find that they feel that Hinduism is under threat. How can Hinduism be under threat in a society as India? Um, but if everybody goes crazy, that now India is under threat, but how can it matter that one stupid person is saying one stupid sentence? It threatens nobody. So if you're feeling so vulnerable that allowing some girl to say some words gets you agitated, then we have a serious problem. People say stupid things all the time. Girls have no magic powers to make it come true. You can say it, who cares if you say it? Since everybody is so fixated on what people say, what people do, obviously, this is not the climate where you can start to prevent radicalization. On the contrary, this is a climate where we create radicalization. So we are creating Hindu terrorists by prioritizing terrorism from the side of government, by repeating the false terrorist threat on the side of media, and by assuming that something that someone says can mean so much. One study has shown that several of these terrorists who are interviewed, this is a study in Pakistani suicide bombers, that they just want fame. They just want to be famous and recognized. It's not even an ideological brainwashing. It's more pop culture capitalism the idea of being famous. Now, why does this make someone famous? Because it is the most discussed thing by government and media. So the very notion of just reducing our fixation on it itself could solve some of this idea to become a terrorist and to get known for your horrible act. But whatever are the causes, there have been many studies, whatever are the causes, this kind of climate that we live in today, where we're so obsessed with what someone should say, as though words can be sedition. I mean, we've known for, even the British knew, and they were occupying, colonizing imperial force, even they knew that sedition doesn't mean words, it means action. And now our government is so afraid that words become sedition. This is not the climate to prevent radicalization. This is a climate that produces radicalization.
My second last question is how to maintain the proper relationship between the state and religion.
How to maintain the proper relationship between
स्टेट एंड रिलीजन, राज्य और धर्म के बीच में कैसा अच्छा नाता हम रख सकते हैं, ठीक ठाक अच्छा.
This is very important. I don't think it is as complicated as the state seems to believe that it is. If we understand that between a person and a person of any kind, we must maintain equality, then the state, which has equality as a fundamental right in many of our constitutional articles, right, 15, 16, 17, if we realize that the state has an obligation to treat people equally, then we can also see that the state has an obligation to treat religious communities equally. And this equal treatment of religion, we use the word secularism to explain. Now, secularism has nothing to do with whether there should be a hijab ban, or whether there should be a uniform civil code, and so on. These are all political questions. Secularism, the only function is to ensure equal treatment between religious groups, just like there is equal treatment between individual persons. So the state's primary requirement is to treat religious communities equally, and that we just call secularism. As far as how people should behave with one another, this is not about secularism, this is about tolerance. We have to tolerate people from different religious communities, different groups, different genders, different castes, different classes. This is tolerance. Even this is not a question of secularism. Secularism needs to be understood in a very narrow, functional way. And if the state would simply enact secular policies, it would be quite simple for the state to deal with religious communities. Just as the state has to treat individuals equally, the state has to treat religious communities equally, and that we call secularism. The problems we've had is that no one has adequately explained that secularism means only this. It doesn't mean becoming an atheist. It doesn't mean solving all religious conflict. It doesn't mean anything like that. It's just the relationship of the state to the religious group. Treat them equally. And if we could just be rational about this and show that secularism is nothing other than equality between religious groups, it's not such a complicated matter for the state to have its relationship to different communities. Obviously, the Supreme Court should be acting like this as opposed to deciding on very specific religious um, uh, decisions, for example, recent Ayodhya decision and things like this. The Supreme Court could make much more simple, rational decisions, like saying that in India we have to live together. So the state refuses to give this to any particular community. We can have a multi-faith, we can construct a multi-faith uh, temple, mandir, masjid, something like this. The courts could be creative and say, no, we are not going to play this game of communalism and clash, because in India, we're a secular country and we're going to treat everyone, all religious groups, equal. Therefore, none of the parties gets this land. Instead, we'll erect a public, multi-faith, multi-religious masjid mandir. But that means we have to start thinking progressively, start thinking ahead, rather than thinking that religious pluralism in India is all about clash. It doesn't have to be like that.
Now I'm going to finish the interview. I'm very close to it. You are even an athlete and you have done Ironman. I want to know a very little bit story about that. What made you to go for Ironman, which is
Yes.
very impossible for many people. Any quick and short, what happened at?
Um, well, oh, I see here some of my some of my medals for the Ironman and so on. So I've been doing um, these kinds of triathlons for maybe 5, 6, 7 years. Uh, Basically, we're taught that you have to be a certain way, that life is about doing this one thing. If you're a man, you study, then you get married, you get a job, you have children, and you die. Now, this is this is this works maybe for large number of people, but thankfully, the reason that we have the technology you and I are using right now to speak, do you think we would have Skype if everyone was convinced that this is what you have to do? We have this technology, we have wonderful literature, we have, I see you have many certificates behind you, where there's a lot of evidence that we are not satisfied with this plain story of how things are supposed to be. So I am an academician and an intellectual, and I am told that, okay, it's one thing that you study many things, philosophy, political science, law, but they're all intellectual. So you have to be an intellectual. Once someone tells me that I have to do something, then I know that I should do something else, because everyone is always trying to limit you. It's a social problem that basically, uh, as a species, the human species has not really elevated its consciousness where we're fundamentally preoccupied that other people should succeed and rise. On the contrary, we are acculturated into thinking that we have to keep other people down. And so what we find in a great deal of social communication, uh, we are trying to reduce people, not elevate people. So I'm always guarded against what people tell me should be done. So when I realized that all my life I've been living primarily this intellectual life of the mind, I realized, isn't it possible to live another life, another kind of life, the life of the body, the life of the athlete, of the boxer, of the runner, of the swimmer? And so I thought, let me try. And I found out, indeed, it's possible. It's just that you have to push yourself. You have to push. You don't listen to what people tell you you're supposed to do. You always start with a um, skepticism that maybe people are telling me because they want order, they want simplicity, they want control, they want orthodoxy, they want status quo. Now, thankfully, there are people like Baba Sahib Ambedkar who lived his whole life trying to get over the status quo, to change, to do new things, to introduce new possibilities. Hindu Code Bill, he says, why should women not have property? Why should women not have equal rights to men? Only someone like Ambedkar could think this in the 1940s and make it a reality eventually. You know, all of the orthodoxy, the parliament stopped him, right? They tried to prevent this code bill because they couldn't imagine that women should have equal rights to men. But Dr. Ambedkar knew women must have equal rights to men. We measure the advancement of our whole social world, society, and civilization on the basis of whether women are enjoying equality to men. So people like Ambedkar show all of us that you don't listen to what people say is normal or expected. You have to transcend it. And I've always been an intellectual, a writer, an author, academic. So I thought, let me transcend and let me become like a boxer, a runner, a swimmer, a cyclist. And so, like Dr. Ambedkar, a pursuit to go beyond what people say. And I have to now go beyond my own expectations because I've always expected to live the life of the mind. So now I live the life of the athlete.
Okay, what keeps you inspired and motivated? What keeps you inspired and motivated whenever you things don't go the way you want?
I have what keeps me inspired is I keep uh, photos of people on my wall. You can't see in the room, but there's Dr. Ambedkar here. There's Ernest Hemingway. There's Yukio Mishima, Japanese writer. And then there are people like Usain Bolt, Michael Phelps, Lance Armstrong, Maya Angelou. So I keep these images around so that whenever I feel like I can't succeed, you remember that these people must have felt that same thing also. That how many times this person also thought, no, I don't have the energy. I don't feel like it. I can't do it. So you look at this galaxy of people who achieved so many things in different ways, and it fills you with motivation that okay, they did it, you have to try. You don't always succeed, right? You don't always succeed, but you have to have these models who went beyond, these role models who pushed beyond. It's very important to always keep looking at them, their lives, Dr. Ambedkar, to show that this was a life not always of, success. It was pushed back so many times, but then with all of these trials, he eventually triumphed. So this is how we all are. Each of us is pushed back. We try to do something, we don't have enough money, we get pushed back. We try to do something, we have a language problem, we get pushed back. We try to do something, there's a caste issue, we're pushed back. So the easiest thing to do is to say, TK, society doesn't want me, I'm Dalit, I can't speak properly. It's easier to give up like this. But then you look at the photograph of Ambedkar on the wall. You look at the photograph of the people that you respect and admire, Malcolm X or whoever, and then I see, wait a minute, they were pushed back. This man was Dalit, this man was black, this woman was not regarded as equal. And then that fills you with the confidence to at least try. You won't succeed, but you must at least try, because all of the people that you admire, that you see around you on the walls, they all had the same struggles that you have, maybe more struggles. And still they tried and they tried and they tried, and many of them succeeded. So I'm a very big advocate of putting the posters of these people all over your walls. So whenever you lose your motivation, you look at them and you remember their story, and then it fills you with new energy.
Okay, this is the last question, and I'm going to end up now. Do you have any question for me?
Uh, well, I would ask you something very similar. What are you trying to do, and why are you trying to do it? Because not everybody is trying to do it. Very few people are trying to do what you're doing. So, what is your goal, and why do you keep going?
Okay, so the reason I I don't know means the first you asked is a very general or specific or something about. It's general or
Either
specific?
way,
Okay, okay, okay. To
but
be
yes,
to be on the point, why I started this channel is the real reason is that in our free time, in my free time, I always encountered such people who drown my energy, who drain my energy, and who always give me a reality vibes, which were nonetheless the negative vibes. And I felt that instead of meeting such people by mistakenly, accidentally on road, street, in building a compound, or by calling up any friend and speaking, and by there is no as such a proper useful conversation which can help both the people to move ahead in life. So I thought that this is a good way, YouTube. And then question comes how I reached here, how Vaman Matters directly came into my mind. The story is that I started watching videos on Indian mythology and Western mythology. I am still interested in mythology. So during watching such videos, when I had very few work in my hand after my graduation itself, and slowly I kept watching, and then suddenly it came in my mind that Vaman Matter. Under this name, we can take interviews of people. Uh, Previously, I was very against starting a YouTube channel, totally against. But I was thinking by what name, which will motivate me. For example, on a Indian emblem, it is written Satyameva Jayate, truth always wins. That motivates every judge. Then I thought, what will motivate me to keep on going? Then Vaman Matters. Well, I understood that no one have used Vaman avatar of Vishnu for such a way, and I thought I will try to explore the Vaman of every person, from where it will help me to grow. It will help other subscribers also to grow, to shape their life. Even though my subscriber gets less, I hardly care about that. But whichever people are there, 10 subscribers, 2 subscribers, or 10 view, 20 view, 1 view, 2 view, if their life gets shaped by the videos which I upload, then that happiness is beyond money, I feel. If at least not my life, then if other people life get shaped, then that will be a very good thing to live by. That is all the reason behind starting this.
okay, that's very good reasoning. I think you and I are very similar like this. When you find yourself surrounded by the average, the ordinary, the negative, then you have two options. You give in to the negative, or you try to overcome it, and you're using communication and YouTube and interviews as a way of rising above and bringing many other people with you.